I've added a lot of diversity to the room. When I started, it had been a bit neglected, I think. It was sort of it's a corner of the conservatory that many people had missed because they go straight through to the Orchid Center, perhaps.
Well, they said, you know what, it looks dangerous and it smells funny.
Right.
This episode is brought to you by my new podcast, Bad Seeds. The phrase black market evokes sinister images. Stacks of AK-47s, crates of cocaine. But potted succulents on a windowsill? No one is calling Crime Stoppers for that. But maybe you should, because the biggest black market you've never heard of might be blooming right under your nose.
This plant could sell for between $10,000 and $15,000 on the open market.
And where there's big money, there are bigger risks.
We were just tied up with what looked like garden string behind our backs, and these big M16s stuck to our heads.
I'm Summer Rayne Oakes. I'm a plant expert and author. On the Bad Seeds podcast, we plunge straight into the underworld of plant crime. From Mexican drug cartels to corrupt elected officials, we explore how the black market for plants has repercussions for you, me, and the fate of the planet. Listen to Bad Seeds on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
My name's Trey Fletcher. I'm the curator of the succulent collection here at ABG.
Okay, so this is your territory.
This is my baby.
Is this within only these walls, or do you feature succulents outside of these walls?
It's basically just in here.
Okay,
Although I help
great.
out in the rotunda and in the conservation garden as well.
Ah, right on. All right. Tell me a bit about this space, because I know you have some special plants in here.
Yes, we have basically what are called old world succulents. So these are going to be from Africa, Madagascar, some from Arabia, and a few from India as well. Essentially, we've got our New World succulents outside because they tend to be a bit more hardy. And so these are from more tropical desert regions, and so they require a bit more protection from the climate here.
And when I think about like Madagascar, I also think about like some of those really cool endemic species as well.
That's correct.
Which ones are you featuring from like South Africa? Is it a specific region?
Okay, so pretty much everything on this side of the path is going to be from South Africa, Arabia, and India, and everything on this side of the path is Madagascar.
Okay. So what are some of your standouts, would you say? And some of these look actually quite old.
Yes.
And established.
The Desert House was established in 1988.
Okay.
And so many of the species were already full grown at that time, and they've been hanging on in here ever since.
Right on. I mean, how do you even go about like pruning something like this?
Very carefully in many cases.
Yeah.
As you can see, many of the plants in here are quite spiny. And anything that resembles a cactus is most likely in the Euphorbia genus. And euphorbias are not only spiny, but also highly toxic. They're filled with a white latex sap that can cause pretty severe chemical burns on the skin. The fumes can cause respiratory distress, and if you were to get it in the eyes, it could cause blindness.
So how many close calls have you had?
Many.
Yeah.
Considering that no one mentioned any of that to me when I started.
Oh.
Yes, it was just sort of, let's see if he lives.
Yeah, that's kind of, I feel like that's the, what is that, like the fraternity induction process?
A bit,
like, yeah.
Yes, too much like that, actually. Although I have to say that I've really grown to appreciate and enjoy working with these plants. That it's ruined horticulture with other groups of plants for me because anything that won't kill me seems a little boring.
So tell me a bit more about, like, you know, I'm always interested in kind of the morphology of some of these plants that come from kind of these unique areas, and maybe you could kind of touch upon that and maybe show some similarities as well. Oh,
sure. So we've got several different, more or less unrelated groups of plants that share the same features. So this is Aluwadia procera, which is from an endemic family, the Dideriaceae, which is only found in the extreme southwestern corner of Madagascar.
I always love that family name because it sounds like you're stuttering a little bit.
Right, it does. So you can feel free to tumble over your words.
Yeah.
But it's endemic, like I say, to the southwestern corner. I think there are 2 genera and about 11 species total. And they're very spiny. The spines serve 2 main purposes. One is for defense against grazers, as you might expect, but also the main form of precipitation in many of these habitats comes in the form of fog. which rolls in from the sea.
Right.
And the spines help the fog condense and then run down the trunk of the plant.
Yeah, fascinating. Sometimes when you get those white hairs or something too, that you could see fog kind of glisten on the edge of them.
So,
now, are these deciduous at all? Do they lose their leaves at any
these are
point?
more or less are evergreen, although they do in the wintertime tend to lose more leaves. Now, some of these are fully summer, winter, or wet season, dry season deciduous, as opposed to many of the local more temperate tree species,
like
which
cool,
are summer, winter.
Yeah, cool versus, yeah, exactly. So when it's droughty, whether that's in the winter or the summer, that's when a lot of the leaves often
correct.
fall up. Yeah.
And next to it, we've got, this is Pachypodium lameri, which is sometimes called Madagascar palm, although it's not at all a palm. Also covered with very similar spines, a similar adaptation to the same environment, but from a completely different plant family.
And then this one's a little euphorbia, right?
Yes.
Is this just a type of milii, or what is it?
That is a type of milii,
Okay.
of which there are numerous varieties,
Right.
subspecies, and even different cultivars.
I've seen a few collectors really
They
are
specialize.
connoisseurs and specialize in Euphorbia milii, which seems like such a pedestrian plant because it's one of those things, anything that you could get at the supermarket
Right.
kind of feels like a pedestrian plant, but all the different colorful bracts and how big the bracts are and small the bracts are and
the
like little
different colors
dwarf
of
varieties.
flowers.
Yeah.
Yes. Highly
So-
variable within the same
Yeah.
species. We've also got a nice collection of cycads here.
I see that. Can you
these are-
take us through some of them?
Sure, these are from South Africa. A very ancient group of plants that date back to before the Mesozoic era. These were probably grazed on by dinosaurs, and that's one of the reasons that they have such tough, spiny foliage.
It's really crazy to think back on that kind of scale.
Right.
I think it was actually Doug Ptolemy in his book of oaks, and he was postulating why maybe some of the oak leaves stay on the trees, and they were thinking about when the mastodons were there, and then it becomes a little bit less palatable when they have the leaves. And I was like, wow, to think about that on that kind of scale, like
That's
the
true.
evolutionary scale, it's kind of
Absolutely.
weird. Even if it's true or not, it just allows you to expand the worldview of time
Right.
for a bit more.
I mean, you have to think about the impact that these large animals have on the ecosystems.
Yeah.
Even after the large animals may
These
be
have a little bit more of a
removed.
toxic taste to
They do.
Right?
They are toxic, and one of the main ways is that there are cyanobacteria that grow on root nodules, and they can cause neurotoxic effects, especially if they protrude from the ground a little bit, and it may get into the dust. So I have to be careful when I'm weeding around and
Oh,
working
you might have to wear a
underneath it.
mask, it sounds like,
Which
a
is
little
something
respirator.
which is something my manager let me know one day when he came in here and found me on my hands and knees in the dust. He mentioned, oh, by the way,
Something you want to know. Now,
Right.
now, interestingly enough, with the cyanobacteria, is that some kind of symbiotic relationship that they have with
yeah,
the
it's
cycads?
a nitrogen fixing
Oh, I see. Okay.
process. It helps
Okay,
the
so
plant gather
similar
nutrients
to
in
like
a very
the-
nutrient poor environment. It helps the plant gather extra
Fascinating.
nutrition.
Okay, and then is it protecting then some of the cyanobacteria as well in some cases?
It's a symbiotic
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, I feel like that's the first time I've heard something like that. So it's, you hear it from like the legume family,
Right.
but not necessarily with the cycad family.
It may help it with phosphorus uptake and things of that nature too, which is the soils in desert regions are particularly depauperate in phosphorus.
Well, look at these aloes.
Yes, we've got maybe 100 species of aloe in here.
Wow.
And only 2, I think, are known to have medicinal qualities.
So is this this really looks like my Aloe broadrodriensis. Do you know if that's the same?
That's Saponaria,
Wow, okay.
also known as the soap aloe.
Soap aloe. Does it have like saponins in it?
It does.
Okay. So
But
instead
which
of like
I guess
a
that
gel.
one could be considered useful, if not outright medicinal.
Huh.
So many of them have very useful qualities, but only Aloe barbadensis, also known as aloe vera, and aloe ferox.
The medicinal ones.
That's
yeah.
correct.
But aloe vera, I think, is cultivated, and aloe ferox is unfortunately, I think, collected in the wild. for
I
their
have
medicinal.
seen some cultivation.
Oh, really? Okay.
Or I've read about some cultivation activities in South
Okay.
Africa.
What I like about these aloes in particular, like my favorites are these these mosaic aloes, the ones that have that kind of like patterning on it.
Right.
I think those are really attractive aloes. I think these are wonderful houseplants, actually. These Clinias,
Yes.
I think those are
That's
so
Clinia
beautiful.
fulgens.
Yeah, and it's just in its little pom-pom. I was always so shocked when it actually, flowered, and I was like, that's so brilliant.
I think Clinia has been lumped back into Senecio.
No. Really? Because
The taxonomists keep us busy with
yeah,
relabeling things.
I actually had a conversation with one of the taxonomists who basically blew up a bit of the Senecio genus and kind of put Clinia, and then there's Curio now, and yeah, so very interesting. This one, is this more of like a tree aloe, or is that still in the genus aloe?
That is actually, I believe that's a hybrid between Ferox and Marlothii.
Ooh. Can you talk a bit more about how the way that because some of them stay a little close to the ground, and then
Right.
others kind of get this almost like this
Some of them take a tree-like form.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's highly variable from species to species. And they can be grouped into broadly into a sprawling or pendant form, tree-like form, and a few others, or stemless even.
Yeah, and I think this is actually really normal, like especially if people are growing these indoors, they really keep those dead lower leaves, and that kind of serves as a little bit more of protection, I would
Right,
imagine.
you'll
too.
see that often in the wild. You'll see a lot of them will retain their dead lower leaves. Some people will strip them off in cultivation to make them look neater, but
Yeah.
When I've got them in place here, I tend to leave them on, unless it's really messy.
Right.
So what we've got here is a representation of the Madagascar spiny forest, which I mentioned before was native to the southwestern corner of the island, and it's a highly endangered ecosystem.
It does not look welcoming, does it?
No, absolutely not. And there's a species of lemur that lives in this forest, and it's able to leap from tree to tree. They have thick, leathery fingers,
Yeah.
and they're able to gather all their sustenance, their food and their water, by eating the leaves of these, which would be
Unbelievable.
toxic to humans.
Yeah. And I wonder if they have like something specific within their stomach, or they have some kind of bacterial symbiosis
It's
that kind
probably
of
an
deals
enzyme
an
situation,
enzyme,
yes.
yeah, that is able to deal with that. Now, what is this like a euphorb of some?
No, this is actually in that same family, in the Dideriaceae. This is Aluwadia dumosa. So it's in the same genus as these taller Aluwadias.
Wow,
But
okay.
it's just taken on a very different.
It almost looks like a ballooned out Synantium.
Right.
Those, yeah.
And at the top of the desert house, climbing along the fence there's a Synantium, which is in the Moraceae, I think, in the fig family.
And what
So-
about this? Like, it almost looks like a kind of weird passiflora of some sort.
It is. Yes, it's sometimes called elephant's foot. This was a wild collected specimen.
So,
Although
elephant's
there are
foot,
no
is like
elephants in Madagascar, but I guess it resembled enough of.
different from Dioscorea, or?
Yes. There are many different things that share the same common name.
Yeah,
one
that's
of the
why it's
reasons that the
always-
Latin names are that much more useful.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely.
So we've got several baobabs in here.
Well, I'm surprised you could even fit them in here.
This one has been in here since the beginning, so it's probably the largest one we have. It's Adansonia suarezensis. So there's a famous place in Madagascar called the Avenue of the Giants, where the trees can grow to exceptional height and astonishing girth. And Madagascar is sort of the center of evolution for the baobabs. I think there are 9 species in Madagascar, 1 in Africa and 1 in Australia.
I've gotten to see them, firsthand, and I can imagine that one day.
One day, this
day.
will outgrow the room,
Yeah.
but hopefully it'll be around that long.
Yeah. What about this guy who's a little bit more prostrate
That's
to the
another
ground?
euphorbia.
Okay.
I believe that's Euphorbia druhardii.
I haven't seen this one before.
It's very similar to Euphorbia millii.
This is pretty stunning.
This is Salvadora angustifolia.
mean,
It's
it's
another endemic
color.
from Madagascar, and the color is fantastic.
It is. It looks like it's, teetering on black, but then you have this kind of powdery
Right.
blue.
Yeah, it's sort of a waxy coating.
Yeah.
It's an amazing plant,
a
and
really
notoriously
scrap-like
difficult to
willow leaf.
propagate, although we have managed it.
Okay, so tell me a bit about the propagation processes of it. Is it
We would take some cuttings and dip them in a rooting hormone.
because it's a little bit woodier?
Right.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they just don't seem to want to put out roots very easily.
So you take tip cuttings, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
This is the the Adansonia digitata. This one is found in Madagascar, but this is also the
Whoa.
species that's,
It looks like a Schefflera.
right, it's the species that's found in Africa as well. It's almost like a weed. It grows very quickly.
It looks so much like a Schefflera when I'm looking at
It
the
really
leaf.
does.
Yeah.
But the foliage is actually edible. I think every part of the plant is useful. The wood's not so great for timber, but you can hollow one out and live in it.
Yeah, I know. You
seen
see
that,
those.
yeah.
You see those like National Geographic videos of like
Sure.
a hollowed out baobab, and people have like their little gnome homes in there.
Right. And I believe there's one that was made into a jail in South Africa at
My
some point.
goodness.
So here we've got, this is a candelabra tree. It's a euphorbia.
So tell me about when they start to like, cacti will do this too, but when they start to wood up, when they get really woody.
Lignification, we call it, yes.
Yeah, lignification.
It doesn't necessarily, it's just a response of the tree to trying to grow stronger or to gain structural integrity, I think.
I see. So it would normally start from probably the bottom,
That's correct.
and then it's almost like, it kind of feels like the analog to like a trunk, really.
Right.
You know, and then they're putting the energy into the green stems or leaves, depending on what it is above.
This particular
Right.
species is used by indigenous peoples as a fish poison. So they will take a ball of twine and soak it in the sap and then toss that into a stream or a pond, and it will kill the fish. And then they scoop the fish off the surface with a basket, and the cooking process neutralizes the poison.
Interesting. So it's almost like a nerve toxin
Yeah,
or
very
something.
much like that. And you'll see that in many places in the world. In South America, indigenous peoples will do that with various types of plants. And even
Yeah.
in North America, I believe the Creek nation would use the red buckeye tree for the same purpose.
Yeah.
So it's something that with very different plants has been used around the world.
These are things that you picked up along the way. It's not the things that you knew before coming into here.
Oh, right, absolutely.
Highly toxic group of plants.
So this is a myrrh tree. So it produces the incense.
Yep.
It's defoliated right now, but it's going to flush out here very
Yeah,
shortly.
and that's something to be said, because you can actually find some plants like this in the trade. I don't think this is like for normal houseplant growers or whatever, but
Right.
just to know that a lot of these trees are deciduous, or these plants are deciduous, and all of a sudden, boom, they bounce back.
As a good example, this is the African myrrh. So that's a different species that's also used for the same incense production, but this one was totally bare 2 weeks ago, and it was just
Well, really
flushed out in
yeah.
the springtime. This is a hibiscus from the island of Socotra. This is Hibiscus scottii.
I was going
It's
to
in the
ask if you had
process
some
of-
Socotra plants.
We do. This one, I thought surely the nice, friendly hibiscus won't cause any problems for me, but the slightest brush against any of the leaves leaves tiny stinging hairs. So you feel like you've been rolling around in fiberglass, basically. And next to it is a fig from Socotra. This is Ficus vasta.
This looks very similar to, what is it called, sea grape? No, I can't remember now. So does that get any edible figs, or are they also
the
toxic?
fruits are not edible. They're not really toxic,
Yeah.
but I don't believe it produces any edible fruits.
So they're not edible.
And you can see this is an Encephalartos horridus from South Africa that's putting out a new whorl of leaves.
I see that you might have one of those blooming onions or the boeas
Yes.
somewhere
Yeah,
climbing
it's
somewhere.
in the planter here.
Okay. You can see all the like green spriggly things kind of coming out. It's like their time of year to
Really flourish.
flourish. Yeah. I have mine at my house, and it's kind of climbing
It's
up.
one of my favorites.
I also love these. These have moved into different genera as well. Where
It's a
is this
cissus.
landed? This one?
Yes,
This is cissus?
it is.
Oh my God, this looks
So it's
very...
in the grape family. It's the same genus as the hanging aerial roots that we saw very briefly in the tropical
What is the
rotunda.
one called, what is it, Enterophora xylophoides or something, or euphorbia?
Yes.
It looks similar
It looks
to
very
that.
similar to that.
The segmented leaves. I mean, this one looks a little floppier.
Right.
So the other one that I'm thinking that's like the xylophoides or whatever is more erect.
That's true.
Yeah, but very similar. And again, this is like one of those things where they could be coming from different places. They could be different genus, from different genera, but then all of a sudden they have the same kind of morphology or features.
Convergent evolution.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's plenty
I mean,
more.
you have this is like the little Gasteria and Haworthiopsis,
Yes.
and the Haworthia is just kind of hanging out.
It's just put up a flower spike, and it's they're opening as it goes up. And before the ones at the top have even opened, the ones at the bottom have already finished.
And this is a type of aloe, right?
That's correct. That's aloeoides. We've got some desert orchids here.
Oh, really?
This Eulophia petersi.
Oh, yes. Those are some of the ones that I got into because they're pretty easy to take care of.
They really are.
And you have a Welwitschia down
We do.
here, too.
That's another one.
Yeah.
That one is probably about 40 years old.
Are you
although they can live
serious?
to be thousands of years old.
Whoa.
And it's a gymnosperm, much like a pine tree
Yeah.
is, and so it does produce cones. Although this one I've not seen a cone.
And then what about this kind of flowering right here? It almost looks like orchid-like.
Oh yeah, that's Eulophia petersi.
Oh, that is the actual flower spike?
Correct, yes.
Oh,
So they're not
my
incredibly showy.
goodness.
It looks great this year.
Yeah.
That may be the
crap.
largest flower spike I've seen on it.
Okay,
yet.
I have well, mine has never flowered, so that's why I'm
Okay.
so like shocked, because I have it for the leaves and not necessarily, I've never seen a flower like that.
I stepped up the watering and the feeding early in the spring, and it's really produced some good results.
Yeah, so
And then right over here,
how are you feeding? How are you feeding? Like, what do you
you can
typically?
see this is another Eulophia.
Oh, yeah.
This is Eulophia taitensis. It's another desert orchid. I use some garden tone,
Okay.
which is a sort of a composted chicken manure blend.
Yeah.
And it makes the room smell for a day or two, but it really produces some fantastic
Is that an
results.
Espoma product? The garden tone?
I believe it is.
What are you looking at, Sonder? What's down there?
Oh, and we've got the Madagascar radiated tortoises. This is a species endemic to Madagascar.
Oh, that's so cool.
Oh, yes.
He's hiding. I don't want to
He
show my
is.
face.
Well, let's see. Let's see if... At first I thought he was affectionate, but he's probably just being territorial. But sometimes if you scratch his shell, he'll start doing a little dance. Yeah, he's a little shy today.
He's like, no, thank you.
Yes.
Does he have a friend, or is that the
He
only
does.
one?
This is Herman, and this is Sheila.
Oh, okay, so he has a girlfriend.
Right. Or it's more like Sheila and her man. And we had them in a smaller enclosure at the top end of the Madagascar section, but
Right.
We decided to make a more natural looking enclosure here and give them some more room to roam around.
Just watch you don't step on their food dish back there.
Yes, they get salads. So I do have a few lithops here, which are also known as living stones.
Oh, yeah.
Little rocks that you would find in habitat in some of the drier areas.
And is
in,
this kind
South
of like
Africa.
typical, like this is how you actually normally see them, right?
would
Among
be.
kind of quartzites and things along those lines.
That's correct.
And you could see them just poking up right here.
And they have really nice flowers.
Right there. Beautiful flowers. Yeah.
I have some trouble growing them here because we can't exactly regulate the humidity. The room is hardly hermetically sealed, so
Yeah.
the ambient humidity from outside gets in, and it makes it very challenging to grow these because they like a very, very low humidity sort of an environment.
I was also going to suggest that like they tend to hybridize really quickly.
They do.
So. And then can we talk also about these? I mean, this looks like an.
Yeah, this is
Is it
a group of plants. They're called caudiciforms,
Mm-hmm.
which sort of or pachycall plants. So it refers to a thick stem at the base of the plant, which is an adaptation to conserve water.
And this is something that also could become deciduous, right? If it
Absolutely.
Is sitting there, it kind of looks like a swollen stone.
In the dry season, most of the foliage on top would die off.
Yeah.
And also maybe a fire could come through and burn that off, and then the plant will just sprout new vines when the rains return.
It's fascinating. And how about this? And is this technically considered a spine or a prickle, or what is that?
I would call it a thorn or a spine.
Yeah.
Same purpose as the others. that you see, but this is an adenia, I believe, and it's a caudiciform, much like the others. So caudiciform plants, it's not a taxonomic designation. It's just it just refers to the similar strategy in water conservation for the plant. Some Stapelia gigantea, also known as the starfish flower. I don't see any blooms on this one right now, but the flower can be up to a foot across, and it looks like a sort of a hairy starfish, and it smells like a dead animal, basically, because it's pollinated by flies.
I was gonna ask you, like, what are some of the smells like here when blooming?
Mostly bad.
Okay.
Although there's nothing
You're not really selling the place, Trey.
Oh, well.
Everything could kill you and it smells bad in here.
I know, but it's not boring. That's the key.
This isn't flower, too. I might as well just like point it out.
It's a kalanchoe.
Kalanchoe.
Yes.
Which are kind of like overlooked. They have really beautiful blooms.
Now, this is Mestoclima arboriforms. It's sometimes called an ice plant.
I've never
It's
really
in the
seen it so
the same family
bushy.
as the lithops, the living stones.
You know, it's so funny because in the houseplant market, you may get like a little sprig of something or whatever, but when you actually see them kind of grown out as like this kind of sub-shrub, it's interesting to see because it's kind of like how it would be in its maybe native habitat. Even these, you know, kind of spreading out a little bit.
Right.
Now tell me a little bit about the like upkeep and the care for this. You had mentioned that you were using some garden tone over there to get the eulophias kind of in bloom. But what would generally be kind of like care for this be? What would like a fertilizing schedule be, especially when you have all these plants planted in kind of like one section?
Right. I'll feed about once a month during the growing season and sort of leave it alone during the winter. I water about twice a week, also in the growing season, and a bit less than that. Many of these plants can survive for years in habitat without any rain, but that's because they have very deep root systems that can reach underground water sources. But here, the roots tend to spread out very close to the surface. And so they require much more frequent watering than they otherwise would.
And are they just kind of spreading closer to the surface because there's not depth of soil, or that you kind of feed them well so they're like, we don't have to grow?
It's probably
down?
some of both.
Okay.
It's sand underneath us, and it goes fairly deep. But the problem is that sand can become hydrophobic, so that the water can't penetrate very easily.
And when does that? Because it seems like peat, you know, if like peat, you don't water it after a while, it kind of just...
It's the same phenomenon. It can make deep soak of the soil here a challenge. And so the plants benefit more by having their roots closer to the surface so that they can take up the water when it's available.
Do you have to do anything to kind of curtail that? Like, do you add any type of saponification or like any kind of soaps or something like that to kind of help penetrate it a bit more? Is there any kind of techniques that you use?
If we had done that early on, it would have been beneficial, but I only began in here about 10 years ago.
Okay.
So that wasn't considered, I think, at the beginning. It was sort of an experiment in here, and I don't think that anyone thought that far into the future.
And then
so we've had to learn this as time has gone on.
And has this been mostly maintenance, or are you kind of actively, I mean, you are kind of constrained on space, but are you like actively, you know, bringing in any types of new plants?
Absolutely. I've added a lot of diversity to the room. When I started, it had been a bit neglected, I think. It was sort of it's a corner of the conservatory that many people had missed, because they go straight through to the orchid center, perhaps.
Well, they said, you know what, it looks dangerous and it smells funny.
Right. So it was a bit of a thicket when I began. So I've fully renovated the entire room since I've been here, and in some places more than once. So I've increased the diversity, sort of taken out some things that had died or that didn't look great. I've increased the feeding, sort of upped the water schedule, and we've even put in the mist system. We've extended that into here.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah,
so
to
that
hear you
in the
have a
morning I
system.
can come in and crank that on and completely fog the room out to provide a little bit more of the natural sort of precipitation routine
Yeah.
that these plants might experience in habitat.
And what are the tools that you're using? I mean, I see you have like, just little pruners,
Yeah,
but do you
this
have
is-
like, do you need loppers or a machete?
I've got
or?
loppers, I've got pole pruners,
Yeah.
pole saws,
Yeah.
things of that nature.
Yeah. And then really big, thick rose gloves?
Thick gloves, thick
Yeah.
leather gloves, because sometimes, I mean,
You look like a lemur.
right, yeah. These are just my backup gloves. I
Yeah,
don't have
those look
my,
thin.
Yeah, these are not sufficient to deal
Yeah.
with some of the spines in here.
Yeah.
And if I were truly wise, I would probably wear long sleeves and wear eye protection at all times, but I like to live on the edge. But speaking of the toxicity, if you could see the wood growing up through the metal
Oh, yeah.
structure there, that was a very large pencil tree, or sometimes called a pencil cactus.
The Euphorbia tyricale?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most toxic plants known. Now, they sell that at Home Depot
I know
garden
kids get
departments.
them, like little fire sticks
Kids
and
get them,
everything.
and
yeah.
yes, exactly. And there's no warning
And there's
label.
no warning, never a warning on
But
them.
when we did some renovations on the structure back in 2014, that tree had to be taken out. And the guys that we hired to do it for us had to wear full hazmat gear, respirators, and we couldn't be in the room when they did it because the
Wow.
fumes were so intense
Wow.
that it was just,
So even,
made your eyes and your
just
throat
because
burn.
of the heat, it fumes off. It's not like you're burning it or anything like that. It
That's
just
correct.
is wow.
It's just the chemicals,
Yeah.
which are, it's somewhat mysterious what exactly the toxic constituents of the Euphorbia sap are. But they've defied analysis. I think Emory came in maybe 2010, and they took samples from a number of these plants and attempted to run them through their scanning devices. But the sap volatilizes very readily, and so it filled the lab with toxic fumes, and it gummed up their equipment and did about $30,000 worth of damage
Wow.
to their lab.
Well, it was
And they didn't get
probably
any results.
doing its job, because if anything wants to eat that, it would gum up all their equipment
Right.
too.
And so for that reason, again, indigenous
Yeah.
peoples have used them not only for fish poison, but also for arrow poison.
Yeah.
The San peoples of South Africa will use, they'll dip their arrowheads into Euphorbia sap and shoot an animal in the leg, and then very patiently wait for a couple of days, because
Yeah.
it's very slow acting if it's introduced to the bloodstream.
Right.
And then the animal will eventually die.
Right.
So it's very effective. So another bit of medicinal lore. This is Catharanthus roseus. Two different cancer treatment drugs are
Is this
derived
the
from
Madagascar
plant.
periwinkle?
It is.
Very
The
important
rosy
drug.
periwinkle, very
Yeah.
much so. But if you were to eat one of those leaves, it would probably be fatal.
Right.
So medicine and poison are often, it's just a matter of dosage and
Exactly.
the manner in which it's administered.
The famous quote of "It's all about dose."
I mean, my main area of knowledge is southeastern coastal plain native plants.
Yeah.
And I knew nothing of succulents when I started here, but I've learned a tremendous amount.
So this is a Sinantium, and then this is one of my favorites, the Xerosisios, right?
Yes,
And this is, I think it's related to the cucumbers,
it is.
isn't it?
Yes.
Now, I have a question. When you do a cutting of this, does this ever get the caudex on the base, or can you only get the caudex through a seed-grown plant? Is that something that you know?
That's a good question. I've never
Yeah.
actually grown one of these from seed. It would be an interesting experiment to try.
Yeah. Yeah, because I have one that has become quite robust. It's probably I don't know where this starts or ends, but mine has kind of filled the space. But it hasn't really, kind of gotten that little bulbous caudex on the bottom.
Oh
and
yeah,
I'm like,
this one, it starts down there, and this one
oh
doesn't
yeah.
not have a
See,
a
it doesn't
particularly-
have, yeah, and,
yes.
and yours is, now that I see it, it's much larger than mine, but it doesn't have the caudex. So I really think it's one of those things where if you, you have to grow it by seed in order to get the caudex. Is that a solanaceous plant right down there with the kind of funky?
No, actually, it's in the Urticaceae, which is the nettle family.
It's funny because I get sometimes those confused because there's some solanaceous plants that kind of look like that.
That's correct.
And then there's a lot
And
of
these are
nettles that look
particularly nasty
Yeah.
because they're covered in stinging hairs.
Yeah.
So it is in the nettle family, and it can be quite painful, which was another thing which would have been nice to know when I started in here.
And then is this, what kind of
That's a
plant?
euphorbia.
That's a euphorbia.
Yes.
And is that similar to the xylophoides or whatever? But it's not. There's
It
a lot of
is.
that look like that.
It is, and in fact, that may be what that is.
Yeah. Because the structure of it just is so familiar.
So another interesting thing of note is that the Madagascan spiny euphorbs and the South African spiny cactiform euphorbs evolved their spines independently from one another. As many euphorbia, Euphorbiaceae is one of the largest plant families, and many of them are spineless. But in the case of these two different desert environments, they evolved the same feature very much independently of one another.
Well, one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, morphologically speaking, the cacti spines are actually modified leaves. And this would be a modified, like, prickle or something on a stem.
That's correct.
And then the leaves are obviously like
Separate structures entirely.
These would be the leaves.
Right.
And then this little pokey bit would not be considered a leaf, but in a cacti that would be a modified leaf.
That's right.
And morphologically speaking, I guess that's how they would put them into the separate families, even though, like, the pencil stick cactus is really euphorbia.
It's an easy mistake to make, is to assume that any plant that's sort of succulent and spiny is a cactus. But very many of them have developed those traits independently of one another.
Well, thank you so much for giving us a tour of
of
your domain. Really, it's become your domain. So thank you so much, Trey.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah. If you appreciate what we do here on this channel, give the video a thumbs up, share it around to your friends, and if you'd like, give it a thanks or become a sustaining member of the channel. Oh, and don't forget to hit subscribe and that notifications button. And if you want to hear my newest podcast, Bad Seeds, head over to iHeartRadio. It's got plant-filled mystery, intrigue, conservation, and crime all wrapped into one. And if you dig it, download it and leave a review. That allows others to find it as well. And as always, we have a robust offering of houseplant courses and such, from Houseplant Basics to the Houseplant Masterclass, which can be found over at homesteadbrooklyn.com. See you next week.